תודה. Thank you. Hi, Cameron Bell, Vice President of Portfolio Management. I am happy that you are here with us, and we would be happy to hear from you about the senior housing market in the US.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you describe a little bit your REIT and your activity in the senior housing market?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company called National Health Investors. We are a publicly traded real estate investment trust that focuses primarily in the senior housing and skilled nursing space. We've been an organization since 1991 with over a $3 billion market cap. So we're a pretty lean team, but we wear a lot of hats, and we have a pretty large portfolio considering the size of our team. Right now, we have a total property count of 242 buildings with 37 different operators, and that's across 34 states. As it relates to just senior housing assets, we have 162 that comprise our total portfolio of 242 buildings.
Wow. So you see a lot of senior housing activity and building. What are your challenges in those days?
Are you asking what our challenges are currently or what they were before COVID?
Currently.
Currently, yeah. I mean, the pandemic's been, I think, longer than a lot of people may have originally anticipated. And the current experience is that, you know, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge from several different aspects. Obviously, there's been census decline for a host of different reasons. And then on top of that, you have staffing challenges, and then you have increased expenses through the pandemic, whether that's acquiring PPE, which is personal protective equipment, you know, gloves, face masks, goggles, even to an extent. We've had operators that implemented what they call, and it varies depending on the operator. Some call it hazard pay, some call it hero or even superhero pay, that whenever a COVID outbreak hits a building, in order to incentivize their staff to show up for work and to stay motivated, that they're paying them a higher hourly wage than what they usually receive. So you have that. And then most recently, a lot of states in our country have started imposing and mandating routine staff testing. Some states, it's twice a week staff testing, just to be able to stay ahead of and monitor the COVID outbreaks. And that's not cheap. You know, it can range anywhere from an extra $10,000 to up to $60,000 extra expense per week per building. You take that combined with lower census, and then the additional wages, or, you know, people are having to rely on overtime or agency staffing. It's a challenge right now, and the next few months we'll have a tough road ahead of us. I think what's helped get us, and just in general for the industry, get us to the point where we are today, without everything just collapsing, is some of the stimulus funds that the federal government provided. Initially, that much all to skilled nursing. It's been within the last 3 to 4 months that senior housing has even been considered for any kind of grant relief.
That's interesting. What kind of reliefs or subsidies they intend to provide to the senior housing sector?
Yeah, well, some of our senior housing operators early on, based on the size of their organizations, and really they kind of had to be smaller in nature and not publicly traded. Some of those groups were eligible for the payment protection program. and they received loans through that. But like I had mentioned earlier, it wasn't until July, August where, the federal government was going to provide stimulus funds by being a licensed assisted living operator. And, we worked with all of our groups to keep them informed of that. They applied for that stimulus. And really, it's kind of been a varied success rate to this point, to be honest. What we've noticed is some of the operators that had smaller application amounts have received their funds already. The ones that had larger companies and larger applications, they've either not received any money, and it's been 3 months since they've applied for the funds, or it's most recently, and I'm talking like in the last week, that they've started getting some of the stimulus that they requested for. So we're kind of in a waiting game on that at the moment. And if our operators do in fact receive those funds, then I think everyone will feel better about the next 2 to 3 months as we enter into our winter season and kind of our peak flu season months. And then there's another round behind that. They're calling it the phase 3 distribution, which is several $1 billion, but really no one knows how that will be allocated out. Our operators have applied for it, but that phase 3, they will not decide on how to allocate it until they've fully funded the phase 2, as I described. It's still active and still ongoing.
How does the life in the senior housing look in those days?
From a resident's perspective?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's, I don't want to sound so pessimistic, but, we've heard the term, it feels like a prison quite a bit. And we say that because before, families could come visit at their leisure, and ever since late March, the only way a family could really see their loved one that's residing in these senior housing properties is either through a window visit. Some of our operators got very creative and set up rotations to allow families to schedule ahead a front porch outdoor visit. So it was at least something, but there was no hugging allowed. Everyone had to wear a face mask or PPE, and they had to maintain 6 feet of social distance. So while it was better than what a no visitation would be, it's still not the same as a family and human contact. And I think one of the biggest issues that really no one has talked about, at least through the major news outlets up until 10 days ago, was the negative impacts of resident isolation, because they're pretty much quarantined to their apartment or just inside of the building. And it was the saddest thing, but like on Thanksgiving, which was a week ago, several, if not most of our residents ate their holiday meal in their apartment by themselves. And that's a very sad thing. And we have great operators. We're really proud of everything that they've done to this point and are still working towards accomplishing. So like I said, they were very creative on trying to combat resident loneliness and try to keep them engaged, whether that's through FaceTime or some other type of tablet video sharing technology so they can see their family, whether that's through the courtyard or front porch visits, as I described earlier. It's things like that that I think help the resident lifestyle and keeps them engaged. But there's no doubt that the strain and the negative impact of isolation is starting to show. And it's worrisome because, we're entering into colder months. So there won't be many outdoor visits because it'll just be too cold, or there will be So I'm confident our operators will think of other ideas to keep everyone engaged. The staff at these properties have also gotten creative on how to engage with their residents. That's outside of the family. But like I said, the next 2 to 3 months, it's going to be tough.
And the amenities are closed? Does the amenities are closed?
Yeah, it really depends on the state, because in the United States, the assisted living licensing varies by each state, and they each have their own regulations, and even the local health departments have different guidelines. But, it can range from, I will say this, most of our operators in most of these states, they are having to shut down their dining rooms. There's a few where they can open the dining room, but you're pretty much sitting one resident at a table by themselves, and each table is 6 feet or more apart from one of the others. But like I said, most are delivering food to these residents' apartments. So that's the biggest one. Dining rooms closed. That's where the most socialization occurs. That's where they get their hydration and nutrition. So that's a pretty big impact. And then for activities, early on when the pandemic hit, and I'm calling, saying late March, early April, all activities were shut down completely. Housekeeping was reduced at a pretty drastic rate, but that through the summer started picking back up. And as I said earlier too, our operators are very sophisticated. They're very creative, and they figure out ways to keep these residents engaged. A lot of our continuing care retirement communities, and those are the bigger entry fee model campuses, some of them hosted major, outdoor events. Granted, the social distancing was in place. They had tents. The weather was nice, so they were able to do that. They set up, hiking excursions kind of around the buildings. The family front porch visits, I think, was a terrific idea. So the amenities are definitely not what they were pre-COVID, and I'm not even sure when those will be back in full scale. And maybe summer 2021, it could be even beyond that.
How does it affect on the occupancy?
Yeah, overall occupancy, what we've seen has averaged a 700 or basis point or more drop. And what I mean by that is if we had a group that was 87% occupied in early March, that they are at or below 80% currently. Some have been able to maintain occupancy within pre-COVID levels, and then others are, like I said, well above that 700 basis point variance that I said earlier. So that's why I say the average, right? So we've seen some groups go 1,000 basis points, so it's been 90% down to 80. But in the last 6 weeks is when it started, move outs and deaths started picking back up again, and not necessarily just COVID-related deaths, just the natural progression of life, which is typically seasonal for November, December, January, at least from our experience. So like I said, these next few months are going to be a challenge for this industry.
Okay. What about marketing? How did you go through this process in the last few months? I mean, personally,
Yeah, for these buildings, obviously there's no in-person tours. They can't be bringing in prospective residents and their families to walk them through and show the community in a model apartment. So a lot of that has been done virtually. which has had a mixture rate of success. Our operators are still getting move-ins, and there's still a demand for this lifestyle and for these care services. It's just that in a lot of cases, families are holding off longer. So what ends up happening is the residents that do move in are typically older, frailer, have a higher acuity level, which then can translate into a shorter length of stay, which can also create different challenges. So what we've heard and are experiencing is, at least initially, leads were roughly half of what they were a year ago. And then move-ins kind of funnel down from there. But because of the lower lead volume, their conversion rate, meaning their sales execution on the lead base, actually went up. So we have operators that are, moving in and selling 50% of their lead base. It's just that the lead base is, at least at this point, maybe 60 to 70% of what it was a year ago. So, when you lose roughly half of your sales and the move outs are the same, and that's also been our experience to this point in time, generally speaking, is that for year-to-date 2020, move-outs and deaths, for that matter, are essentially flat compared to what they were in 2019, pre-COVID. So I think that's a good storyline for the services that we provide. That yes, even though the virus does enter into our communities, that the infectious disease protocol of our operators is strong enough that that they haven't experienced any kind of major outlier situations. There's obviously going to be one-off buildings that have worse outbreaks than others, but in aggregate, that's been our experience.
What do you think about the argument that, at the end of the day, if a senior is staying at home, he's alone. But if he's in senior housing, he might, have some social, some other people he can meet, some amenity he can use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the biggest selling point. It's just how do you connect with those families and those prospective residents and, sell the value. Selling the real estate doesn't work. It hasn't worked in several years, and it especially doesn't work now. But you're exactly right. At the end of the day, our belief and our operators' belief is that these residents are safer and will have a better quality of life in these buildings. The one drawback, obviously, right now is they can't see families. Hopefully, when the vaccine comes out, that the buildings can open back up. But, if you remember, and I don't know if this happened in Israel or not, but it definitely happened in our country. When news of COVID and shutdowns first were being discussed, grocery stores were selling out of almost everything. So you're seeing you're hearing horror stories and seeing terrible pictures and videos of these frail and elderly trying to get basic needs at a grocery store, and they're either getting shoved or trampled, and it's just a terrible situation. So yeah, if a person is living at home and no one's around to help them grocery shop or help them with their med management or with their meals, then absolutely senior housing is a better solution, because you're going to have food, the care and the nurses are going to be at the building, and the biggest piece of all is the social aspect. There's been so many studies, and the reason why senior housing is so successful is because the socialization aspect. And like I said, it's been muted a little bit for the past 7 or 8 months, but we'll get back to opening the buildings back up. It's just it's a momentary, and I'm not trying to make it light. It's obviously very tough, but we'll get there. And like I said, our operators are still selling. They're still moving people in, and there's always going to be a need for these services. One buzzword that's been tossed around quite a bit was pent-up demand. And we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, that and families are holding off longer to move in their loved ones, whether that's for personal reasons of, well, I don't want to not see my parent anymore, or it's, as we're entering into the holiday season, we want one more holiday season with our loved one before we make that decision. But we've heard pent-up demand quite a bit, and I'm hopeful that is the case. If the loneliness is as impactful as we think it is in these people's homes, and they're not socializing, and they're not getting the nutrition that they need, then that'll create a higher demand for the services that our operators provide.
When you need to decide, let's say, your next investment, would it be in the senior housing or on other sectors?
We're pretty opportunistic. We look at everything. As I said earlier, we have 162 senior housing buildings, but that's a wide array of different types of buildings. We have independent living, which is kind of at the lower end of the acuity. We have assisted living with memory care attached to it. We have standalone memory care communities. And then we have those entry fee buy-in CCRC, it's continuing care retirement community model, where the residents pay a large upfront deposit, and then they have a monthly service fee after that, and either on their move out or passing, that their family gets some of that initial deposit back. But in those CCRC settings, they have everything from independent cottages down to skilled nursing all on one site. So it's a pretty good value sell. So that's our senior housing property mix. But we have over 70 skilled nursing facilities. We have 2 medical office buildings, and we have 3 hospitals, 2 of which are psychiatric. And that's a space that we're still looking to grow in, and because there is a need for a lot of that in this country. So, like I said, we look at everything. We're still looking at senior housing deals, but because of COVID, we are being more cautious than we were before. And it all comes back to being opportunistic. It's got to be the right operator. It's got to be in the right location and the right fundamentals and the right deal structure in order for us to proceed.
Okay, that's nice. Anything else you would like to share with us?
I think one of the biggest things right now is talks of the vaccine, which is changing daily at this point. So there's obviously news of approved vaccines, and it sounds like we're a few weeks away from that being distributed, and obviously not being large quantities, but any type of vaccination into the marketplace, I think, is a good thing. And what's really great to hear is that they are prioritizing the long-term care setting, both for residents and staff. Obviously, that's needed to the most vulnerable population. So that's music to our ears that they were going to prioritize our sector. I think, to be realistic, January, February is probably the right horizon that we'll start to see the vaccine get distributed to our buildings. And that at least puts us on a path forward to recovery from our vantage point. One other anecdote that's kind of come to light recently is obviously the UK approved the Pfizer vaccine just yesterday. But then there's the other vaccines and what those side effects are and how willing are residents and the staff going to be to get inoculated. And, you know, we don't really have a window into that. Really the only data point that we can rely on at this point is what the historical experience has been with flu shots. And, you know, we have a 90+% participation rate from our residents. So a lot of our operators feel pretty good about participation rate with the COVID vaccine. And then there's different opinions on how you treat the staff. We've heard that some states are considering mandating that all healthcare workers get the vaccine. And then we have others that are just going to strongly suggest that you take the vaccine. And in one or a few cases are contemplating making that a mandatory item as well. So, like I said, it's changing daily. I think people are cautiously optimistic that it'll put the industry and the organizations on some kind of recovery rate, and we hope that's the same as well.
Yeah. Nice to hear. And to close the session with such optimistic words.
Yeah. We hope so.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron. It was very nice to speak with you.
Oh, no, thank you for thinking of us, and we're happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much.